Welcome everybody to today's Esports Research Colloquium. I don't want to waste any time to listen to the presentation by Christian Böffel on skins and performance as well as gaming experience in esports. As always, we will listen to the presentation that is about 40 or 50 minutes. And then we will have a discussion where your questions are warmly welcome. And if you don't want appear in the recording, feel free to send me your questions. So without further ado, Christian, I'm looking forward to your presentation and the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Today I want to talk to you about skins and cosmetics and how they might influence our gaming experience and possibly even performance. My name is Christian Böffel and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Psychology in Aachen. And I will briefly introduce myself and sort of talk a little bit about my background. I started out by studying chemistry, but I noticed after I completed my bachelor's degree that I'm not all that interested in molecules, but I really enjoyed experimental work in the lab. So I basically just switched topics, but kept the method intact, so to speak, and I became an experimental psychologist. So my background is in cognitive psychology, pretty close to biological psychology, and I want to approach the topic today and the whole subject of esports from a more experimental and cognitive psychological perspective. In terms of gaming history, I started out playing Age of Empires. I was pretty late to the party. We only got our first PC when I was about 10 years old, I think. And my first competitive gaming experience was with Warcraft 3. I reached quite a decent level at this game and participated in almost all national tournaments at the time. Then I looked a little bit into World of Warcraft, a little bit, of course, being a huge not exaggeration, but yeah, it took a lot of time for me during my school days. And nowadays, I'm mostly playing games like Path of Exile and Teamfight Tactics. So I'm also interested in these topics from a personal point of view and not only from a scholarly perspective. Yeah, today I want to talk to you about cosmetic microtransactions and skins in particular and how they might influence our gaming experience and potentially even performance. And of course, this is particularly relevant if we talk about esports games because performance is a crucial factor here. And if we look at the most played esports titles worldwide with the biggest prize pools, we see that Counter-Strike Global Offensive is the most paid for, so to speak, game right now in esports. And if we take a look at what of these games are actually monetized by a cosmetic microtransaction model or a microtransaction model in general, we find that pretty much all of them contain microtransactions to some degree. And there are different kinds of microtransactions within these games. Some offer to buy season passes or DLCs. Some offer to buy skins, which I will mainly talk about in this presentation. Some include loot boxes, which give you random cosmetics, and so on and so forth. I want to talk to you about skins from a cognitive psychological perspective and basically make the case that even though we usually make the argument that these changes, skins, are only cosmetic in nature and therefore not relevant for competitive gaming, and that this might be something that is not all that clear from a psychological point of view, and that we should indeed take a look at skins when it comes to esports and gaming in general. And I will talk to you about some data we have collected on this. This is an emerging research topic for me, and most of the studies are a first step into this realm for me and our research group. And there's a lot of more work to be done. And I want to also make the case for potential future studies and give you a few ideas which aspects might also be relevant when we talk about skins in gaming and psychology. So at first we might ask ourselves, what do skins actually do in a game? And skins, first and foremost, are a way to customize your character. So if we look at the default skin at the bottom right, this is an example in League of Legends. We have a character that comes with the default skin, and you can play this default skin for free, but you can also pay money in order to acquire one of the customized skin and use them in a game to basically make the character look like you want it to. And maybe you prefer characters and skins that are more on the funny side of things, or maybe you want to look very serious and more threatful, and you can decide this by choosing an appropriate skin for your character. We know from previous research that customization by choosing skins, for example, increases how well a player is able to identify with their character. And also, since customization gives you more control over the game and the environment, it increases perceived interactivity, meaning that a player feels more in charge, more in control when they get to select their character's appearance. We do not actually know all that much about fun and performance with relationship to skins and cosmetics. So this is something we try to look into in the first study I want to present you today. And with aspects related to gaming experience, such as fun, perceived competence, and interactivity, identification, but also because it's particularly relevant to the esports world, we try to take a look at performance. And the example game we chose was League of Legends, mainly because we were allowed by the developers to use their material in our study. So we didn't want to conduct a study like this without approval of the company behind it, and we asked to use their material such as artwork in our study beforehand, and we got the green light from Riot Games to do so. That being said, this study is independent of any funding from a company. This is mainly done because it's interesting to me and my collaborators. There's no funding behind this from any major company or anything like this. So it is not a conflict of interest, so to speak. Okay, since I'm a cognitive psychologist trained in experimental psychology, we try to do this with an experimental approach in League of Legends and in a psychology lab. That means we try to control for as many possible factors as possible by having a highly controlled lab environment. This, of course, is very different to the environment you usually play games in at home, where you might have different distractions and other influences, and we tried to control for them by conducting the study in a lab. We had 24 participants in our first study, and participants were able to conduct the study with either a male or a female character in the game, and we had a total of 24 participants, 14 of which were female and 10 of which were male, and only 8 of them reported to play the game League of Legends at least 1 hour per week. So this is more or less a typical student sample that was recruited by Sophie, who also conducted this experiment in the lab. And as you might know, if you're working with student samples, but you are actually interested in a very specific topic, such as gaming or esports in this case, it is usually pretty hard to find an appropriate sample that does have the experience and the background that would be most interesting to your study. So this is already a limitation of this experiment that we might come back to later. We gave participants the choice to perform the task, and I will explain the task in more detail later. by playing with a male or female character. We know from previous studies that usually female gamers prefer to play with female avatars, while male gamers are somewhat indifferent. Some of them prefer male, some of them prefer female characters. And in order to make it easier for each participant to identify with their character, we gave them the option to choose their character's gender. Both of them are somewhat simple ranged fighters that are also rather similar in overall appearance and also have a similar set of skins to choose from. Participants conducted the experiment in one of two conditions, or in both conditions actually, with a customized avatar. They were able to choose from a set of 8 skins, and the second condition was with the default skin instead. And the order of conditions, first with the default skin, second with the customized skin, was counterbalanced between participants in order to account for order effects. Now to the task at hand. We let them play a game of League of Legends, but it was a very simplified version. We used the League of Legends practice tool to set up a laning scenario. As you might know, if you're familiar with MOBA type games, these games are usually played 5 versus 5, and the game is organized in lanes. And usually a lane has one character of each team fighting against each other, and they are also accompanied by minions that also engage in combat. And one of the main ways to acquire money in the game that is needed to buy items and grow your character is by scoring last hits on those enemy minions. And you see the small enemies in red. These are the enemy minions. And the participant's task was to score as many last hits as possible on these enemy minions by landing the killing blow. And only the killing blow yields you money in the game. So while this is, of course, a highly reduced task compared to a complex game where you have team fights and so on and so forth, this is one aspect of performance that is relevant to a game of League of Legends, because proficient players are able to almost score 100% of possible last hits and gain a monetary advantage like this. So we choose this task as one possible way to measure performance because it was somewhat easy to implement in a laboratory setting. The participants had no opponent. They were all by themselves on the lane and could focus entirely on the last hitting task at hand. And they were given about 10 minutes per condition to land as many last hits as possible. They conducted the task one time with the default skin and one time with the skin they were able to select from a set of skins beforehand. And we recorded how many last hits they were able to score. Additionally, to examine the gaming experience, we asked them after each trial to rate their agreement on 3 scales. 1 scale for identification, 1 scale for fun, and 1 scale for perceived competence. These were based on the gaming experience questionnaire by Eiselstein and colleagues. And every scale was a 4-item scale. It took the participants a few minutes to complete this questionnaire, and we additionally asked them to estimate what percentage of last hits they were able to score as another subjective performance measure. After that, we compared both conditions with repeated measures t-tests and found only one significant result in comparing these 2 conditions, namely significant effect of identification. Participants identified more strongly with their character after they were able to customize it, but they didn't have a significant increase in fun after customizing. They didn't feel significantly more competent. They didn't rate their performance higher, and they didn't show higher performance objectively. So only identification was significantly influenced by skin choice. In an exploratory analysis, we also looked at the correlations between the measurements we took. And above the diagonal, you see within subjects correlations. That is, we accounted for the repeated measures in our task, and between the diagonal, you see the sort of classical between subjects correlations. And as you will notice, most of them are pretty much aligned with one exception, that being fun is positively associated with performance in the within subjects analysis, but negatively associated in the between subjects analysis. And this is quite interesting. And the reason why this might be the case is possibly that participants or the same participant has more fun if they are able to perform better in the task, which is pretty obvious. But if you compare two different participants, the participant who is more proficient at the task had less fun, possibly because the task was a little bit boring to them, especially if they are already experienced with the game. Most importantly, I think we found that identification was related to all other subjective measures, for example, fun, competence, and subjective performance, whereas fun was only significantly related to identification. And overall, some of these relationships are somewhat unclear, especially the relationship between fun and performance. While this is an exploratory analysis and it should be taken with a grain of salt, it is interesting to note that identification might be a factor worthwhile looking into some more, because it could prove to be, for example, a mediator for a possible relationship between customization and fun. That being said, the difference in fun between both conditions was not statistically significant, but on the other hand, we do find evidence that identification is related to fun and customization is related to identification. So it is not exactly clear how these relationships do pan out in the future. In future studies, we should look into this some more, and we do find some limitations of our study here. Taken together, we find that skin choice influences identification. So some aspects of the gaming experience are influenced by skin choice, but performance and other subjective measures were largely not influenced by our manipulation. That being said, the task itself focused primarily on timing and accuracy. There were no social aspects represented in this task. There was no enemy, and we know from a different study we are conducting right now that social aspects are a crucial reason why people buy skins in the first place. So it would be very interesting to include a social dynamic into the task as well. Furthermore, we do have a manipulation in this study that focuses primarily on the choice of skin, but not the skin itself. So only selecting the skin was pretty much the difference between both conditions. We were not able to look into a relationship of a certain skin and performance, for example, because our data set was not set up to do so. So, for example, we have a pretty even distribution across the selected skins, and each skin was selected by about, let's say, 4 or 5 participants, and this is simply not enough to run an analysis between each selected skin. So if we are interested in effects of a certain type of skin compared to another, we need to conduct a different study. This was mainly a result of choosing the skin, not exactly some aspect of the skin itself. The task, of course, is somewhat boring compared to real gameplay, although most participants indicated that they enjoyed it quite a bit, especially compared to other psychological lab experiments that are usually pretty repetitive and even less entertaining. It is worth noting that the skins we used in the task were not owned by participants. This is also a major difference compared to the real gaming situation where you buy a skin and use a skin, and participants might enjoy using a skin they own more in order to justify the purchase in retrospect. So this is something that is also worth looking into. And last but not least, we should also try to look at other means to measure performance. This is quite difficult because we were interested in having a measure that we can use in a short-term laboratory study in a highly controlled environment, and it's of course difficult to actually have them play an online game and, for example, record kills and assists and so on, because there are a lot of different factors that might influence the gaming experience that we have no control over in this setup. For example, people might encounter teammates who are toxic. They might win the game or lose the game. And these are all factors that we have little to no control over. So to start out, we conducted a laboratory study in a highly controlled environment, but of course, we now need to basically bring this closer to reality by having tasks that resemble the real gaming experience more closely. We also try to look into a certain aspect of skins that could be interesting. Then what else do skins do? They change the appearance of our character, and they make the character look more threatening or harmless. And in this example, the left skin is rated significantly more threatening compared to the right one. But of course, as you all know, if you are in a game situation, this is the same character, and how the character looks like does not impact the character strength whatsoever. So we have sort of a disconnect between what the character looks like and how strong the character actually is. And therefore, we think it is interesting to look into decision making, and because participants or gamers are often confronted with a situation in which they have to make a decision to either fight an opponent or avoid an opponent. They have to decide whether they are stronger than the opponent or weaker, whether they should run away or call for backup. They have to estimate what they can potentially get from attacking the opponent, what they can lose if the engagement goes bad. And if skins are perceived differently in terms of how dangerous they look, they might influence these types of conflicts on a very fundamental level, because we do have an innate tendency to avoid objects that look dangerous to us. And if we want to attack a dangerous looking opponent, we have to overcome this sort of tendency. And if we flee from an opponent that looks harmless, this might also be more difficult. So players might avoid characters more often that use skins that are more threatening. This was basically our research hypothesis going into the second study. And for example, the skin you see right now at the top right is one that looks more harmless compared to this one, which is rated substantially higher. So we suspected that participants were attacking the first one more often and fleeing more often when confronted with the second one. To examine this, we conducted a preliminary study by asking participants to rate skins in terms of how threatening they are perceived. We did this with 30 participants, 10 of which were female, 20 were male, and they used this sort of slider thing to rate whether they think this character is threatening or not. And based on the results of this study, we chose for every character 2 skins that were significantly different in terms of perceived threat. And we chose in the preliminary study 50 characters that were the most played characters in League of Legends at the time of the study. So in the real study, we now confronted participants with an in-game situation like this. They were presented at the bottom left and confronted with an enemy on the top right. And we asked them whether they would attack the enemy or rather run away. And each character was portrayed in a threatening skin one time and a harmless skin the other time. And participants were also represented either by a threatening avatar or by a less threatening avatar. The owner, for example, being the less threatening avatar in this case. We asked 50 participants to make these judgments, 22 of which were female. And again, as was a problem with our first study, most of them had no previous experience with League of Legends. So we really, for future studies, should look into a more relevant sample, so to speak, in order to make any generalizations for the esports scenario. But it is also interesting, of course, to see how a person who's not too familiar, a person maybe who just starts out playing the game, deals with these types of situations. So they stated how likely they were to attack the enemy. And again, we controlled for character by having each character represented by both types of skin, more threatening or less threatening. And the results showed that participants took into account how threatening the skin was the enemy used, and also how threatening they perceived their own character to be. And the difference between low threat and high threat skins on the enemy is about 10 percentage points. So participants significantly more often decided to attack enemies if they used a skin that was less threatening, even though, of course, skins do not actually impact how strong the character is in fact. They additionally took their own avatar into account by attacking more often if they have a more threatening looking avatar, and there was no interaction between the two. So the own threat level did not significantly influence how the threat of the enemy was perceived. They are more or less orthogonal to one another. So based on this, we can conclude that at least it appears plausible that skins could influence how we perceive such in-game confrontations, and might influence us in a way that we tend to avoid characters who use skins that are more threatening. But of course, there are some limitations here as well. It is unclear whether this is affected by experience, and we will look into this further. We have some data on previous gaming experience in this study that we have not analyzed yet, but one possible way this pans out would be that someone who's really familiar with the game would be less influenced by skins because they already know that this is a factor that is irrelevant, while people who are not too familiar with the game might rely on such a heuristic more often. Of course, these situations again are very artificial, so to speak. They do not necessarily reflect real situations all that much. Of course, we do have lane matchups in the game as well, where one person fights against another people in a lane and has to make a constant decision to engage the opponent or to avoid it. But we do not know whether our ratings in this task do reflect actual behavior in the game. So this would be a good next step to do, to look at actual behavior in a laning scenario, for example. This could be achieved by having a confederate play against our participants, and we need to find a way to observe their behavior and to codify the behavior observed, which is quite difficult to do for several reasons. But one starting point might be to basically just count how often a participant attacks our confederate based on the skins the confederate uses. This would be maybe one first step to do so. So again, I think there's a lot more work to be done, but I think we can make the case that there could be an influence of skins in these decision-making processes. So additionally, I want to give you a short outlook on other aspects of skins that could be relevant both for gaming experience and the performance in games, and how possibly we could try to study these effects. Because what else do skins do? They make you stand out, or they make you blend into the background. So we have some skins that are very flashy, very colorful. For example, the bear skin on the left, or we have skins that use camouflage effects to basically be harder to detect. And this is relevant because we can say that a lot of situations in games require some kind of visual search. If you are confronted with a team fight scenario, you might have the task to take out a particularly dangerous enemy, and in order to do so, you have to identify them in a very complex scene at first. So this can be pretty difficult, of course, if the enemy uses a skin that blends well with their surroundings, and it is easier if they use a skin that pops out. It's also relevant if you have to monitor your environment and notice enemies that are sneaking up on you. And the other way around, if you are playing a tank and your main objective is to distract your enemies, it might be helpful to have a skin that is highly visible, also because your teammates are able to follow your lead more easily. And if we look at research done on visual search in a laboratory, this looks something like this. People have to indicate whether a certain object, for example, a green dot, is present in a scene or not. And we know that this is a lot easier and faster if the target is different from its surroundings. So basically, basic research tells us that there should be an effect of this type. And it is especially helpful in very large and complex scenes, because if we have a target that is highly different from its surroundings, it sort of pops out, and then it doesn't really matter how complex the scene is. We do not observe an increase in reaction time with complexity of the scene if the target pops out at you. So using a skin that has this sort of pop out effect could be really detrimental if you don't want to be seen and targeted easily. This was a sort of an outlook for one angle to tackle with regards to basic perception, but we could also look at more complex behavior, because we know that avatars are able to activate associations and stereotypes. For example, the skin on the left is pretty funny looking. It might therefore be associated with something cute, while the character on the right takes an aggressive stance and might be associated with aggression. And why could this matter in games? Because we know from previous research that people have a tendency to act in correspondence with stereotypes activated by how their avatar looks. And this is called the Proteus effect, and has been demonstrated in very different paradigms. But the first study basically observed that people tend to be more aggressive, for example, in negotiations, if they are represented by a taller avatar compared to a smaller avatar. Other studies, for example, observed that if you are controlling a black avatar in a game, you tend to behave as a white person more aggressively compared to when you are embodying a white avatar. So there's a stereotype that associates black skin color with aggression, especially young black males are usually perceived as aggressive based on the stereotype. And if we do control such an avatar, we tend to behave more aggressively in accordance with this stereotype. And of course, there have been other studies like this, for example, based on antisocial behavior or risk-taking, and many more. So while some effects in social psychology have proven to be hard to replicate. This effect appears to be rather stable, and there have been meta-analyses that, well, provided evidence that this is actually a thing. So the effects are not too enormous in terms of effect size, but they appear to be stable and replicable. And of course, this might be relevant in games as well, because some avatars look more aggressive while some look more harmless. And it might be interesting to look into these effects of skins as well. So we have a certain to-do list now. We want to look further into effects of skins on decision-making by having a more natural environment. Potentially, we could also try to look at footage from streamers or at replays and analyze it this way, and potentially even crowdsource some data sets or by asking players to simply record their games and state what skins they choose. We want to further examine effects of skins on perception and attention, for example, by using paradigms of visual search. And we might further look into Proteus effects or effects of stereotype threat that could also be impacted by skins. Different angles might relate to player motivation based on skins, because it might simply be more fun to use your favorite skin, and motivation, of course, is always relevant in these types of situations. And to look into motivation potentially as a mediating factor might also be interesting, and many things more. Last but not least, I want to try to give you some advice. Of course, this is only based on some of the findings we have right now and some of the theoretical observations or considerations. But I think we can make a few solid points here. First of all, we can look at functional aspects, and you can ask yourself when choosing a skin, do I want to be seen or do I want to distract enemies, and whether or not you are a character that needs to stay hidden and deal damage from behind, or whether you want to distract enemies could influence what skin might be best for you. There are some considerations also related to animations and visual effects of skins. For example, the hitbox of certain abilities might be the same for each skin, but the skin's effects might be different. So it might be easier to avoid certain effects or certain skills based on the skins used. And some skins sort of might misrepresent the actual hitbox of certain abilities. And this could also be interesting. And last in this category, you might ask yourself, do I want to be under or overestimated? For example, if you have a tournament game and you know you have a lane opponent that has a tendency to basically overextend and be overly aggressive, you might even provoke him further by choosing a skin that looks particularly harmless or funny, in contrast to a skin that might be more threatening. Furthermore, I think it is very interesting to consider effects on complex behavior. For example, we can make the case that you could use skins to nudge your behavior. For example, if you are a player who tends to be more on the timid side, who wants to be more outgoing, take more risks, be more aggressive in lane, it might be helpful for you to actually use a skin that also looks more aggressive. I know this sounds a little bit weird, but there's solid evidence that this could actually change your behavior at least a little bit. So it is something that is worth considering as well. And of course, you might be able to motivate yourself by using a certain skin, or if you are a coach of a team or a team leader, you might use matching skins or something similar to build team spirit. And last but not least, one additional idea would be to use skins associated with certain mindsets. For example, you might have a certain skin that is your try-hard skin, and using the skin might activate your tournament mindset and allow you to perform better compared to other skins that you use in a more casual environment. So yeah, these are some further considerations. I think there is a lot more work to be done, but I have, or I'm very interested in looking into these types of effects further. I thank you all for your attention, and I want to thank my collaborators, Sophie Würger, who is also present today, Marvin Buri, Jochen Müssler, and Sabine Schlittmeier, and of course also thanks to Oliver Leis for organizing this talk. Feel free to contact me and ask any questions. I'm also very interested in collaborating, especially in terms of actually getting towards a scenario that is more closely related to the real gaming experience, and also examine samples of gamers who are actually proficient at the game, which I think would be a very useful next step. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian, for your interesting presentation. I think you did a great job on presenting your research and providing some insights.
Thank you.
I have some questions to start with, and I also have a private message in the chat that I'd like to forward to you afterwards. And Brian also raised his hand. But egoistic as I am, I want to start with my question. On slide 8, regarding your first study, you presented the demographics of the participants.
Yes.
And that they play at least 1 hour per week. Can you say something about how many hours they play on average?
There was a huge range of responses there. So we had, I think, a few participants who reported to play 1 or 2 hours of League each week. And I think the maximum we recorded was something about 30 hours. So it was quite a heterogeneous sample, if you will, with most people reporting they do not play the game at all at the moment, and some who are extremely high and some who are extremely low. So we have a huge variance in terms of experience with the game and how often the game is played in the sample. So it's really hard to work with this, I think, because we sort of clump these together as 8 people who have experience, but even within these 8 people, we have a lot of variance. For details, I would have to look up the actual data on this, but the range was quite substantial and the variance was huge.
Okay, and I also agree that I would expect identification, but also performance to increase in a second trial, playing with a default skin and then with a customized skin. But have you counterbalanced the design, starting with customized and then default, and on the other hand, starting with default and then customized?
Yes, so we have divided the participants in 2 groups, and one group starting with the default skin, one group starting with a customized skin. Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry if I missed this point.
Interestingly, I think there was only little improvement between both trials, but of course it's important to control for this. Yeah.
Okay, then we continue with Brian. If you still have your question, yeah.
Oh, yeah, so I'm playing CSGO as a digital ethnography, and I'm writing up a paper now, and I wrote, I can't believe I didn't think I'd ever buy skins. And you know, and I totally would have dismissed it before my experience. And this is all in psychology journals or technology. What's your discipline you're aiming these at?
We are not sure quite yet. I think from my background, personal background, I think I'm aiming at journals mostly targeting human-computer interaction, especially since some of these paradigms we use are closely related to other lab situations. But I think if we are able to translate this into research that is targeted more closely or more related to esports world, it might also be relevant to sports journals. So we are currently figuring this out. We have submitted one paper or planning to submit a paper on the first study here to Frontiers in, I think it's a sports section of Frontiers in Psychology.
So it is psychology. I really think it's marketing. You know, it's if you look at Veli-Matti Carluti's theory of psycholudic development, is where a game becomes important. You know, I've done 1,700 hours in CS:GO since fucking lockdown stuff happened. So I swore, but you can swear about COVID. It's because it's so annoying. So anyway, since lockdown, I'm CS:GO, and I spent €100 on a knife. I called it the psycholudic prosumer. I named it because that's what it was. It was me creating and activating a media experience, and you know, it was psycholudic development. No, you can have your turn later, Cassie. No, they don't care what you think about me playing too much CS:GO. Anyway, and if that was it, it was aesthetic value, the marketing value, and what I compare it to is almost going to the gym. Do you need the Lululemon yoga pants for €100? Nobody needs that, right? It doesn't make you more flexible, more bendy. The Reebok top doesn't work, make you faster with the, you know, trainers. Okay, different, but generally, it's about you know, just your own motivations of wearing. So some people spend $50 on Calvin Klein underwear, you know, which is insane considering what they do with them. And it's that sort of marketing aspect, a luxury good. And one thing I have in my diaries is I rented a knife from Loot Bear, and I rented a €400 knife. I'd never buy that. I'm not that mad. And I rented a €400 knife, and I was playing with a 17-year-old from the UK. And I didn't play with him for a few months, and we played together matchmaking. He said, "What happened to your knife?" And I was like, how the hell did he remember that? Because I wouldn't remember it. But like, and I went back and I checked the dates, and it was a solid 2 months between me playing with him and me playing with him again. And he remembered that knife, and he would have played another 10 different games on Steam, you know. And then I was like, is this a status thing with the younger kids, the teenagers, which, you know, is difficult to interview? That's one thing. The other thing is, as I'm doing this research, I'm looking at the prices of the knives, and you're looking at 10 grand for a knife, and that's the equivalent of having $10,000 underwear. Except you're you know, if you get $10,000 underwear, you're not going to wear pants ever again. But like, who buys a $10,000 knife? It's a status thing. So, you know, if my advice is, we're looking at this, the labs thing is kind of cool, but going out and talking to people and you know, social constructivist view of it, especially with the concept of artifacts, because it's so much premium branding, luxury branding. It's so silly. I mean, I've named, that's what the cat wanted me to tell. I've named some of my guns after my cats. That's what she was really trying to tell me there. You know, I've Cassie, I've Little Johnny, I've, you know, joke names, and I have a bit of fun. I also gifted people at my rank, friended strangers. Cost me less than a beer. Couldn't go out and buy him a beer anyway. So I'd buy him a gun, and one guy's name has the word Tony, or this guy Dennis. So I bought him a yellow FAMAS with a gold Nova sticker, and I called it the Menace for Dennis the Menace. And I gifted it to him to celebrate him reaching gold Nova. And one of my good friends, who's a high figure in esports, he says, you know, he's got his knives always gifted to him through the higher levels of esports. So that gifting behavior is also there, and Steam has that thing. So I just think you've got a great start here, and I'm just giving you the sort of stuff that's been coming to me while I've been writing down. You know, I literally am going out, I'm listening to this presentation. Maybe I should buy a new AK skin because my sprays are getting better. And I'm going, oh my God, this is madness. You know, and I've before the knife, probably maybe €200 over 1,600 hours over 16, 17 months. And it was, again, lockdown, not spending money, lots of toys, lots of stuff I don't need because I can't go out and spend money. But I don't regret it, because if I look at that value, that €200 over 1,700 hours, compared to going out for an expensive dinner with a couple of bottles of wine, which is the equivalent, and boom, too much wine and you don't remember that anyway. Like, it's not actually that much per hour. It's, you know, a whole cup of coffee argument, and you can resell your skins and you lose 15% to Riot or whatever. So just that's where I'm going, because you're talking about stuff. I'm looking at it from a different perspective, as social constructionists. No, Cassie, no, you're not allowed in there. And that's where I would think that you could take this very, very much, because it's something that I would have thought it doesn't make my performance better, but it makes my enjoyment of the game better. And the game means something to you. It's much more important.
Yes, this is very interesting. We have another study on the way that looks into players' motivation, why they buy skins, and we try to come up with an instrument to measure these motivations in a questionnaire that also is applicable to a wide variety of games. And some of these aspects you are mentioning are also represented there. And Sophie is conducting the study with me, and she might be able to link you the questionnaire in the chat if that is possible. For example, gifting is one major factor, status, social effects. You want to be perceived in a certain way. Maybe you want to support the company. And one thing that we didn't have in mind in our pilot study on this is people actually buy, especially in CSGO, buy skins as a sort of investment because they can increase in value. And there are people who spend an enormous amount of money on this and state that, well, this is actually how I make a living. I'm buying skins, I'm selling
just to tell you about that, I did experience that with a guy who came at me with a trade. So I pushed him, and I always sort of ask questions. And he's a college student, and he would have made 600 euros out of it over the previous year as a supplementary income. So just say like, and then I've interviewed people about this. That's actually huge. That's a whole different research paper. And if you're starting with this, you could go that direction too, because I don't want to dig into the trading of CSGO skins because I did my economics degree and I didn't like it. But you know, it's huge.
Yes, we are currently looking into this as well with another study. But in this line of research, basically, I want to look at what skins do in terms of how they impact players in the game. But it's also interesting to look at why people buy skins in the first place. And there are different reasons for this. Some people also already state that they are functional reasons, even though they are usually seen as only cosmetic, but some people are already aware that they might come with a competitive advantage.
I did try one thing. The AVP is the most powerful gun in CSGO. And when you die, your enemy gets it. I named mine, You Will Miss. Just in the hope at one point the enemy picks it up and they go, You will miss, I will. And a little seed of doubt. I don't know how to test if that's worked. A lot of people have shot me with my own gun, but I did try to create a competitive advantage by naming my AVP. And it's probably silly because, so there isn't one angle I took.
That's also an interesting idea. I didn't know that you could name them. That's also something worth looking into, maybe. Thank you.
Yeah, also thanks from my side, Brian, for your insights. And we have another question from A. Graham.
Hey, Graham. Yes, one of many. So for those who know, my name's Graham. I work with Riot Games as their international relations manager. Just point of hand, I did not know that we participated in the study, so I'm not here to kind of keep tabs. I just wanted to mention something on the topic of how skins can affect your gameplay, because one thing, part of what my job was to do was to help make more rioters aware of how our esports competitive operations teams actually operate. And one thing I was very interested to know was how we actually regulate skins within pro play. And there are actually a lot of things we do, because as you mentioned, some skins can produce distracting, camouflaging, or confusing effects. They could change the look of a character so that it's harder for other players to identify and react to them. It could alter an ability visually to the point where it's maybe easier to target an enemy, and it could change maybe a change in frame rate or a drop in animation speed. So it might be interesting to know that our referee team actually works quite closely with the development team. So they get like a list of new content to be added, and they test these against dummies just to check for any kind of visual discrepancies. And then the referees will also speak sometimes with the skins teams during the development process, so they can kind of spot an issue before it comes out to the player base. And professional players also do provide feedback on a skin's perfect sometimes. We obviously don't make these barred skin lists made to the public, and to be quite honest, most skins, the most issues created by these skins are very minor, and it's very rare today for a skin or a cosmetic item to actually be banned or disabled. But obviously it has happened. And probably the most interesting was I think a few years ago in the North American professional scene, a player had a very rare form of color blindness, so he couldn't actually identify a particular champion's ability when he was wearing, unless that character was using like a special skin. So like it hasn't happened again since, but it's an interesting thought. So I thought that it'd be interesting to know your reaction to that. One thing I also want to bring out as more like in a personal example is obviously, when Valorant came out, it tried to do slightly different things with the skins. So you get skins that are like elaborately animated and have different effects, and you can actually pay more to upgrade the level of the skin. So, for example, you can have this living dragon rifle, and you can put in extra riot points to then have, when you reload, you give the dragon your ammo clip, and he clutches it within his talons and pulls it in, and then there's also a finishing effect where if you get the last kill of the round, you get this cool like fiery explosion. So but what was interesting is I noticed this new phenomenon where in CS:GO, for example, if you die, it's oftentimes that a player will pick up your gun because it has a cool skin attached to it. But in Valorant, what I noticed was that, and Brian, you can tell me if this happens in CS:GO too, is players will sometimes, your teammates will come to you before a round and want to swap guns with you because you have a skin and they don't, and they want to test it out with, having to pay them.
I have experienced it a bit recently, actually. And the other thing is when your friends are there and you start throwing, goes, oh, you got to check out my new skin to the people that your friend is strangers. And then the round starts and you're like, oh, wait, hurry up. And then you lose like 20 seconds. We have lost rounds sharing skins.
Exactly. And where it gets even sillier is, a player will, often, they don't even ask you in the chat. They just literally drop their gun on the floor, and it's expected that you will drop your gun and pick theirs up. But what ends up happening is sometimes I just don't want to do it because, I like these skins and I want to actually have the chance to use them myself for once. And so I have said, no, I'm not swapping it. And the player, and very rarely, but maybe once or twice, a player has actually griefed me because of it, right? Like they deliberately lose the round, or they pretend to, they just follow me and pretend to shoot me. And that to me is a really interesting reaction that, because a player didn't follow this thing that's just kind of, I guess, an expected custom, the response now is to be mean to that player.
By the way, Valorant has set somebody, I won't say who, gifted me some riot points, and it was great. And I looked at Valorant to spend these points, and there was a steampunk set, and I only had half the points necessary. But Valorant are doing a really cool thing, and I was just going, Graham, you just wanted me to buy these, just give me enough money to get half it, because this steampunk set was so beautiful that I actually was like, I really want these guns, and I still haven't got back in to get them yet, but I will. And the sets idea by Valorant they're lovely. I think they're actually a step up on CS:GO, to be honest, in terms of visual appeal and that approach. But now Charlotte's got a question, so we better let her go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just listening. The question, it's kind of turned into more of a discussion, which is nice. But oh, sorry, I just raised my hand again. Lower hand, there we go. It kind of relates actually to what Graham was saying about pro play, and particular if skins given a competitive edge, perhaps because you can't see abilities as well, or you can't identify them as quickly. So I know you mentioned that looking at different levels is something for future research anyway, but I think that my kind of logical brain thought with no research background in this makes me think that yes, I can get on board that this pro play may identify these potential competitive advantages, but then I also think back to my experiences as a level 25 player in League many years ago, and I was intimidated just by the fact that somebody had a skin, regardless of what that skin was. So it didn't matter whether it was threatening or less threatening, just by simply having a skin was a perceived threat to me, because I thought, wow, this person cares so much about this champion to spend money on this skin, therefore they must be better than me playing this person who I haven't bought a skin for. So when I think about putting all of these people into one study, you might kind of get null results, because you're mixing these people that are threatened by the mere existence of a skin, and then if you've also got the high level players in that sample as well, they're going to maybe sway it in a different way. And I imagine there's lots of those kind of intermediate casual gamers who either own a lot of skins because over time they have accumulated them through gifting or through these kind of chest rewards, and so skins are perhaps less, well, they're common. You go into games and everyone has skins, so there's going to be different perceived threats depending on level, but that's just my brain part. for you this morning.
Yeah, this is very helpful because in the second study where we compared skins based on how threatening they look, we had a few characters where the default skin was actually perceived the most threatening one. So it might be helpful to instead include the paid skin that is most threatening, because as you mentioned, having a skin in the first place might be irrelevant. So maybe we should control for this by only having skins that are not default. That's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Regarding study 2, I have 2 considerations that it's also important to assess or take into account where the picture, where the frame is located. So, for example, if it's close to a tower in League of Legends, then players might be more aggressive because they can back up and are safe behind the tower or below the tower. And what character is displayed for their selves. So, for example, if it's Leona or if it's a champion that got a dash or flash that can move out of the situation. But this is just something that you can think about in future studies or maybe have controlled. But some time has passed since I haven't forwarded a question to you and some feedback from a private message. So it says, thank you for your clear and insightful presentation. I have 2 questions, if I may. You mentioned measuring performance via different means. Have you considered measuring self-efficacy and or self-esteem? Both have been found to relate to performance and or body image, which appears to link to skins.
Yes, we haven't done this yet, but we have considered looking at self-efficacy. But this is an interesting point that we should include in future studies, I think, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And the second question, and then it's Carsten Heilmann's turn. You have found a range of correlations in your data. It could be that your relationships are quite complex, perhaps more complex than bivariate correlations. Have you considered using mediation analysis to account for such complexities?
Yes, we thought about, for example, including identification as a possible mediator. I think I've briefly touched on this, but it's kind of difficult to justify the exact model right now. I think we need to conduct further studies on this, because it might also be the other way around, that you have more fun and this leads to more identification. And in this case, fun would be the mediator. And it's really difficult to decide which way the cookie crumbles, and what is the mediator, what is the predictor, and how these relate to each other. I think you're exactly right. It's very complex. The only thing we can say right now that they appear to be related in some way, but we have difficulties in figuring out which way around this goes. But it might be worthwhile to either control for some of them or to manipulate them directly by a certain manipulation in the task itself in order to get to the bottom of this, which is quite difficult right now based on the data we currently have. I want to touch one point you mentioned earlier. I think in terms of decision making, it would be interesting to just look at decision making as is as well. Not even talking about skins in the first place, but how do gamers actually perform these types of tasks, and how do they arrive at a certain decision to engage or to avoid? And they might be influenced by what items they have, how much health the opponent has, where the teammates are on the map, if they are close to a tower, and so on and so forth. I don't think we know what factors influence such a decision in the first place. So we try to control for each of them by having a very simple setup in this study, but there might be many factors that are relevant.
Thank you. I think I can echo what Brian said earlier, that an interview study might provide some great insights, how decisions are being made. And on the other hand, there are studies starting to investigate how positive emotions influence performance, for example, by Behnke and colleagues. That might be interesting. I can forward them to you if you're not aware of them.
That would be fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I will do so. And now it's your turn, Carsten Heilmann.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. First of all, thanks for the nice talk. Found that very interesting. I am particularly interested into the decision making, like how skins influence decision making. And I have a teamfight tactics background, the same as League background. I'm coaching both games. So I kind of find this a nice and interesting connection, because like in teamfight tactics, actually the skins also reflect some strengths the character has, right? Like, I don't know how much teamfight tactics you played. You said you play it, right?
Yeah.
Like if we look, for example, at Warwick, who is like a really weak unit in most of the sets, but there was like one set where he was in a different skin, where he was like really, really strong. So I think that could be very interesting to test teamfight tactics player in League of Legends and see how the decision making is impacted through to that skins they have like a particular strengths related to.
I think teamfight tactics is particularly interesting because a lot of possible effects that are relevant in League, you can sort of rule out in teamfight tactics. You cannot choose which enemy to engage, for example, in teamfight tactics. You just get matched with a random enemy. So this is something that that is basically already prevented, and you probably don't care as much about any perceptual influence, how well your character is being able to be detected in front of the background or something like this. This probably doesn't matter in teamfight tactics. So I think it would be interesting to observe whether such effects are relevant in teamfight tactics as well. I think the point you raised was about skins of not the player avatar, but the characters that you place on the map instead, and they change between sets. And this might be interesting because people have to unlearn certain things, and as you pointed out, this might be difficult or more or less difficult depending on whether the skin changes or stays the same. I think this is interesting, but I have not thought about the characters in teamfight tactics, only about player avatars so far.
I think I phrased that wrong. Like, I mean like testing teamfight tactics player in League of Legends, but then like with skins that are related to teamfight tactics, and like, for example, a Warwick that is like a 1-cost Warwick skin versus like a Warwick 4-cost skin, and like seeing how the decision making versus those situations changes probably, right? Because we assume like this Warwick skin, who is like really strong in teamfight tactics, is in League of Legends also stronger than the one who is in teamfight tactics weaker, because we like correlate that probably, right?
Okay, so for example, you would have the new Volibear skin in TFT, which is I think legendary right now.
Yes.
And this would be perceived stronger by a TFT player in a game of League compared to the default Volibear skin, which was a 3-cost, I think, at some point in the game.
Yes.
That's very interesting. Yeah, we might look into this, or could look into this, because some of the associations formed in one game might translate to the other game.
Yes, I think there's a bigger impact to see than if like someone has no like real perceptions on a random skin, right? If they don't know the skin, I think if that could like make easier results being seen.
Very nice idea. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have to agree, good contribution. And we have another feedback in the private message that basically agrees to what Charlotte said, that the decisions being made in relation to what skins an opponent has. For example, players perceive that certain skins are used by professional or more experienced players, and that being that, the person said, I think there is definitely something in regard to skin choice and decision making. just short feedback. And I would also be interested, given that your studies were basically conducted with amateur players, I would say. How would you say would the results of study 1 and study 2 change in regard to professional players?
I think in study 1 we might actually observe larger effects for people who are familiar with the game, because they already have potentially associated a certain feeling with the skin, and they might be able to select their favorite Azrael skin and then perform better because they feel more confident using this skin. So the effects might be larger in the first one, but probably the effects are smaller in the second one, because people are more aware of the fact that skins are primarily cosmetic or only cosmetic, and they are able to abstract better what actually matters in these types of situations, and how to evaluate how strong I am versus how strong my opponent is. And they are probably less influenced by the irrelevant skins. This would be my hypothesis, at least.
Thank you. Maybe Sophie has something to add to that. If not, are there some further questions from the participants?
I'm all good. I actually, after all this, I want to go play CS:GO. I'm on vacation technically. I want to go, I'm thinking of buying that new AK skin. I'll call it the Christian Sophia Paradox. So I'll name it, because talking about skins makes me want to buy a skin, and that is something unimaginable to this 40-year-old, the most rational consumer ever. By the way, I teach consumer behavior for 10 years. My underpants all come in 5 or 3 packs. I don't have a single Calvin Klein piece of clothing, and I go for quality or tailor-made, or Rick and Morty is nice. So I am the most rational, one of the most rational consumers, because I've been teaching for so long. And how skins have made me spend money on something so irrational is fascinating to me, because and look, okay, God, yeah, all the Transformers I have, giant child, but at least they're there. I look up and see them, they make me happy, and maybe that's what my skins do for me as well. I call my Galil my crappy AK-47, so I have fun naming him. And I think maybe it was a COVID influenced act of presumption, because you're locked down, and I think that maybe drove it a lot, and it can't be denied. This wouldn't have happened without the pandemic. But I think this is just a fascinating thing in terms of psychological terms. And I can't believe it got me into it. And I can't believe, I'm going to have invested 350 euros in skins probably over 2 years, and then maybe another 100 euros experimenting with opening cases, which is the other aspect, that gambling aspect. Because I have a friend who got 2 knives twice in a row, the same knives, from opening 2 cases. 120 euros worth. I might have spent that much opening cases, logging the results as part of my research diaries, going, nope, 20 euros spent, €1 worth of skins. It's not even worth the effort selling them. So, I think this is a fantastic topic, and you guys go so many years. You should look to collaborate with so many people, and you should maybe talk to Esports Research Network people and put a shout out and see who's interested, and make it multidisciplinary, because I think this is, blows my mind. And it's great stuff, guys. Well done.
Thank you. It was pretty much the same for me. I didn't spend money on skins for the longest time, and then I bought some, and it's just weirdly fun. I cannot really explain it. It's I don't regret it, but it's still weird to me that they got me to do it.
Okay, then I don't want to add my experience about skins to that, but I think it's good.
Because you're embarrassed as well, right? You're slightly embarrassed.
No.
Yeah, we all are. It's like, oh, I've spent some stupid money.
But I have one last question. You acknowledged loot boxes when you started your presentation. Mm-hmm. Can you say something about that and how future research may look like?
Well, I think this is a whole different beast. I think it's a very different from buying a skin that you know what you will get. So as Brian already said, I think the gambling aspect is really relevant here, and I'm not too familiar with the gambling research.
Joseph Macy does a lot on this with Yuo Hamari, so that's a very good shortcut is to go Google Scholar and look up Joe Macy, or Joseph Macy as is in Google Scholar, and his stuff is really good. And you can start there with him, and we had him on the podcast as well. He's on episode 2 of the podcast, so you can watch the Esports Research Network report. No, it's not a plug. It's just that Joe actually knows this stuff, and there's stuff in there, crash betting or something. I still don't understand it, but it's in his paper. So if you start with Joe's work, you'll get a good platform to understand the skins.
Thank you.
The loot boxes.
I wouldn't be too surprised if the reasons to buy loot boxes are very different from the reasons to buy skins, and the whole gambling aspect, I think, is really important, and that's also the reason why some countries try to regulate it. I think if you live in Belgium, for example, they are now forced to reveal with 1% probability you get which content in the loot box, something similar. So maybe you can get your data on this if you are interested in how rare it is to find 2 knives in 2 boxes. But
I did look at the numbers. I did go look at the percentages. It was a very, 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 very big number to get 2 in a row. We're talking like nothing like that has ever happened to me in terms of probabilities.
Okay. Yeah, I think the mechanisms are probably very different from buying skins as is compared to buying loot boxes. But we need to look into this. Yeah.
In CSGO, where you get the loot boxes, a lot of time they're dropped to you. You buy the key. That's where they get you. I've spent so much money on imaginary keys now that are gone forever.
So you already have the box lying around just waiting to be opened.
No, I got bored and decided to open them all in one evening as an experiment, as part of my research. And I can't ask for the university to fund it, of course. I can't go, hey, look, I hope I've got a receipt to be doing this. Like, oh, you're fired. No, you shouldn't be doing that.
So I might have to play some TFT later, also for research, of course.
That is, look, take my word for it. Once you're playing esport games and you're researching esports, even during the daytime, that is insider knowledge. That is becoming an authentic researcher. Once I publish my paper in CSGO, I'm going to point to the 1,700 hours and say I need a pay raise for that extra 1,700 hours I did of work. It's in the science, it's published, it's facts now. But yeah, no, definitely. I think everyone should be playing. I think it's one of those things that researchers, when you see someone say computer games, and you know the last time they played one was Pac-Man in college in the 70s, and you're going, oh, video games or PC games. You don't know games. And I think it's it's hard for people who don't play to actually research them, or at least a member of the team should be a player. It's good if there's a non-player and a player. That's optimal, because then you get one person going, this is bananas. But for people who don't understand games at all to write up research on games, it's a bit off to me, because you have to have some knowledge within the research team.
I think it's even more difficult if you talk about gaming, because gaming has been used as a term to mean gambling in some research disciplines as well. So it's kind of confusing in that way.
Okay, then once again, thank you, Christian, for your great presentation.
Thanks,
and also thanks to Sophie for collaborating with you on the study. Thanks everyone for joining today. I think all questions are answered, and have a nice day, have a nice week, and we see each other next month to the next Esports Research Colloquium. Goodbye.
Goodbye.